Good morning, friends, distinguished panel members, guests, faculty, alumni friends, students, and members of the media. A warm welcome to you all for today's Industry Academia Dialogue on Make in India. The panel is moderated by the Director of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, Professor Sushil Vachani.
Welcome to IIM Bangalore, those of you who have come from off campus, since I know that many of you invitees have come especially for this event. It's a Sunday morning, so you must be quite determined and very interested in the topic to come out here this early. And I'm so thankful to our panelists who some have come from out of town, shows their commitment to talk about this extremely important topic that even our Prime Minister has been talking about, the concern for making things in India, both for our own consumption as well as for exporting abroad so that we can be a much more important player in the global economy. As you know, as time goes by, despite our recent slow times, we are one of the top 3 or 4 economies in the world when you adjust for prices. And soon we will be, in the next 20, 30 years, we'll rise to be number 2 at some point as China goes past the US. And it will take us time to catch up with the US even in terms of prices. But we are on the way up despite slow times and hopefully much faster times in the next few years. As any economy evolves, they tend to go from being an agrarian society to manufacturing things and onto service. We seem to have kind of skipped the manufacturing stage in some ways. We are very, very impressed and pleased with all the local high-tech companies which are producing services for users around the globe. But we need a lot more jobs and economic activity based in manufacturing. Just to give you a couple of statistics, today, or recently, a couple of years ago, India's agricultural sector was contributing about 18% to the GDP, and China's had come down to 10%. Of course, those numbers are misleading because the number of people involved is much more than that percentage, because there are lots of people living in very, very modest means in the villages of India and China. India had gone past China in terms of services, 53% versus 43%. That's misleading. Those services are very low value-added services. Very few of those are Wipros and Infosys. So that number is large for India, not because we're doing outstanding job with services across the country, but because we don't have enough manufacturing, where China has 47% of its GDP coming from manufacturing, whereas ours is only 28%. So that last number tells you the task that needs to be looked at. We're very fortunate today to have 4 very accomplished and experienced executives who are in sectors of different sectors of manufacturing, though we do have 2 from the aerospace sector. We have Dr. Arun Chandavkar from Biocon. He is the Chief Executive Officer and Joint Managing Director at Biocon, a BTech in Chemical Engineering from IIT Mumbai, and a PhD in Biochemical Engineering from MIT in the US. And he manages Biocon's business, specifically looking at corporate strategy. We also have Mr. Anant Agastya, who's sitting right to the extreme. Mr. Chandavkar is next from the extreme. Mr. Agastya is with HAL, Management Academy. He's also an engineer. I guess it's difficult to get away from engineers. He's a BTech in Mechanical Engineering from IIT Madras. He's one of our own. He did his PGDM from IIM Bangalore 1981 batch. He's a senior member of the American Society for Quality. He's trained over 3,500 management trainees and design trainees at HAL. He was recipient of the Corporate Guru Award by the International School of Business and Research in Bangalore. We then have next to him Mr. Chris Rao, who is a vice president with UTAS Aerospace System. He's a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering with vast experience in management, including operations, marketing, finance, materials, and people. He joined Goodrich Aerospace, Aeropac India, which is a part of UTC, United Technologies, Aerospace Systems in the US. He grew the business from as few as 15 people to 2,300 and has focused on manufacturing design, engineering, sourcing, and supply chain management. He is an executive committee member of the American Chamber of Commerce. And sitting closest to me is Mr. Nayak from Reliance Industries. He is the senior vice president of the PVC business. It's a billion-dollar business. He is also one of our own graduates, having graduated in 1983 from the PGP program. I think he was the first batch to come out of this, what was then the new campus. He set up Reliance's operations in China, so he's a great person to make those comparisons of the kind that I was making, and was head of Reliance Industries China operations from 2003 to 2008 when he came back to Mumbai, which is where he's based now. He obviously has a very deep understanding of China. So with that, I'm going to hand off to the panelists. They'll each take about 10 minutes each for their comments. And then we'll have some time for a discussion and interaction with the audience. So I'd like to invite Mr. Agastya to come over.
I'd like to share some thoughts on what is the subject of today's discussion. My attempt would be to raise a few questions and what I think are pertinent so that we move from just a slogan to some hard and real impact on the economy and the industry. So I'll touch upon a few issues. One is how do we move further and what are the challenges that are there? Some questions on the measurement of the progress, because most of you would, particularly the students, would appreciate that anything that you want to improve must be measured. So we need to look at, do we have the right base for that? Third is, what steps HAL has initiated to consciously support the maturation of the industry so that the industry can grow. I hope those three would be important and relevant to today's discussions. So let's talk about the three stakeholders that we have: government, industry, and labor. To make an industry grow, these I would say are the three key elements. I like to bring an analogy with the Indian system of performing a yagna. We have made a sankalp, make in India. That's our sankalp. But we have to now go ahead with the performing the yagna. And we need the stakeholders to play their part in bringing their offerings. Because in a yagna, the spirit is to offer in the form of a sacrifice. We offer what we have, what is given to us. So the yantra of this process, and I like to bring in these words into this talk. Essentially, I've realized that you need to have yantra, tantra, and a mantra. Then only you complete the whole process of what you start with. So the yantra of this process has to be, in my opinion, the one that has worked reasonably well in the government setup, which is the mission mode. So the mission mode in which the telecom mission and various other missions have been set up by the government is probably the one that is likely to work. So the yantra of this mission, the yantra which is a mission, cannot remain in the central government. Because you'll see that industry finally has to put its seeds into a state. The states have the land, the states give the resources, they have the laws that govern these industries. And therefore, I think the state governments must actually establish missions on the same basis that the telecom mission or other missions have been set up by the central government. And then the central government has to be a catalyst. It has been attempting to do it through the GST, changes in the state, the sales tax, etc. And it has to bring in the required infrastructure support in terms of the investment, power, roads, transport infrastructure, etc. And the commitment or the offering that we need to have from the state governments is to ensure a harassment-free administration. And what I'm talking is not easy. We all know that. But I think if we really mean business, the government also must mean business. That's a hard part of it. The government often does not mean business. Because their way of looking at business is very different from the way business and industry looks at business also. But I think even if we move delta X in these directions, you can get a lot of growth in the industry. Now, what about the industry itself? Industry has to bring the tantra. Yantra is there and the tantra. And tantra is technology. So, industry will have to bring in the tantra of investment in technology and productivity. Key issue of the survival of Indian industry will be productivity and quality, which will have to bring down the costs of manufacturing. Then only we as Indians, as consumers, will be prepared to purchase products made in India compared to what you would get. The big challenge in the West, when the Japanese started to invade their market territories in electronics and automobiles, was exactly this, that a car could be shipped from Japan and it could be sold in Europe or in USA cheaper than cars produced there itself. Cheaper, fuel efficient, etc., etc. also. So that is a challenge the West had to meet in the 70s and 80s. And they went through a whole generation of change in their way of managing the industry. So we also need to bring in that kind of a conscious attempt to change the way we run our industries, and we have to cope up with those competitive pressures. We cannot expect the government to be protective of industry. That should go out of the industry's mind, that the industry can expect a protective environment. So industry has to make credible commitments on the compliance to laws and change the culture of entrepreneurship, which is ethical in practice. Discrimination by government or industry based on size, sector, and other forces that actually subvert some of the intentions should actually go. So I'm being prescriptive, but I'm trying to generalize, I'm bringing up the issues that are relevant to what we are talking about. I also believe that we have to become a socially responsible industry in terms of the kind of products and processes that we bring in. We have a whole industry on colored water. And after decades, we realized that it had added to the obesity issue and health issues of the nation. So I think we have to now relook at ourselves. How do we engineer our industry thinking to say that the products and processes have to be really not causing a damage in the short or long term? Industry must evolve an Indian philosophy of making that does not imitate blindly what has worked and developed in the developed world. And it includes the kind of energy base that we use for production and the relationship we have between labor and industry and so on. Now labor, the third point of it. Labor needs to evolve a single band of labor. The big thread that we can see is that you have an organized labor and an unorganized labor. And yesterday, a few days back, somebody was mentioning, within the same factory, just like we used to have earlier, a canteen for executives and a canteen for workmen. Or we used to have toilets for executives and toilets for workmen and so on. These are all facts of life. Many of you might not have seen it. But this is the way industry was being run in the 70s and so on. The same thing is now coming in at the labor level, organized labor, contract labor. So you give somebody a sweet because he's a permanent employee. You don't give him the same sweet when you're celebrating something because he's a contract labor. Now these distinctions have to go, otherwise we'll be faced with extremely disruptive forces which are socially and economically going to take over the process. So let me come to the questions that I would like to ask. Is Make in India measurable with present approaches to industry data? Are the classifications and categorizations adequate for decision making and result analysis? For example, do we have data on each subsector delineated into small, medium, and large industries? Since this is an industry academia conclave, sir, I think that it's pertinent to raise the issue of data as an analysis for or review would be otherwise not be satisfactory. And I think IIM Bangalore is probably the perfect place where some of these things should be looked into. Secondly, but closely related to the first, we have the policy issues being addressed only to provide advantage or support to some of the sectors and not for every subsector. So can we look at which sectors are likely to grow and therefore invest more into the analysis of those sectors, both from an economic perspective and from the management and finance perspective? Is a subsector going to attract entrepreneurs to invest only because there's a demand and a few policy changes are in the pipeline? I'm going to ask about it in the aerospace itself. Just because there's an FDI policy change, will it attract entrepreneurs? What class of entrepreneurs would be attracted? All these questions also need to be addressed when we are talking about trying to trying to go ahead with the Make in India policy. So every subsector and every sector has its own economics. And we need to understand that one rule for all, one size fitting all is not a solution that's going to work. This is again an area where academic institutions must develop models, econometric studies, and business models for each of these subsectors and sectors. Only when we have reasonable analysis possible, then can we say we did this and this is what is happening, and then if we do this, this may happen, and so on. So we need to bring in that complex relationship into data, which will then get translated into a collection of data, survey, and analysis, and then we can say policy making is driven by analysis rather than by just thinking something might work. So I come to the next, last part of it. I don't know how much time I have, sir?
Couple of minutes.
Okay, yeah, I think I should be able. So let me just give people, since the audience is probably not so familiar with aerospace, I thought it will be good to share some of the data that I have here. India is the third largest armed force. The defense budget is US dollars 37.3 billion in 2014. 40% of it is for capital acquisitions. But also India is the largest importer of defense equipment. 40 to 70% of India's defense equipment is imported. And you can say that after 70 years, why is HAL also saying this and not contributing more to it? We have 9 defense public sector units and 41 ordnance factories, which manufacture all kinds of equipments, and their turnover is about 8.57 billion US dollars. And the employment is about 2 lakhs people. There are 25 joint ventures that have been approved by the Foreign Investment Board, Promotion Board, in defense manufacturing. Armed forces are going to buy $175 billion worth of equipments, weapons, and systems in the next 7 to 8 years. $175 billion. And we'll be generating more than $10 billion worth of business opportunities through the defense offsets policy also. So this makes us, in terms of defense market and aerospace market, one of the biggest markets in the world. India is currently the 9th largest aerospace market and is going to become the 3rd biggest in a few years. So that's some of it. If you look at the manufacturing sector, share of global manufacturing, China is 24.1%, United States is 17.8%, down from 24 earlier. Germany is come down to 14.9%, Japan is 7.3%, and India is 2%. This is a 2013 figure. So we have to look at what has been the contribution of the manufacturing sector to the economy. It's just about 15 to 16%. It has been more or less stagnant. You can draw the graph so that you can look at it going up and down, but it has not moved very much from 15 to 16% as percentage of the GDP. And if we had to move it to 25%, we are talking about increasing it by 66% in a growing economy. Imports of arms, we have been one of the biggest importers. And in 2013, $5,581 million, that's $5.5 billion was the import. So what does this mean? That many areas in the defense and aerospace are exposed to imports, which puts us in a strategic weakness that we are dependent on somebody else for not only buying the equipments, but also repairing the equipments. In an aerospace product, in the military, the product is alive for 40 years, almost like a human being. And you have to upgrade the product and you have to maintain the product for 40 years. So that's a big challenge. And even in just the aftermarket section, we have a lot of business which we can do actually, if we can only equip ourselves with the technology. So the key issue, I'd just like to conclude with this, is that our focus of industry, in my opinion, has to move away from just saying what will we make, what will we produce, to what technologies are going to create the future products, and to invest our human resources and our money into R&D spending in those technology areas in a very focused manner, so that in those sections we will over a period of time have the opportunity to play in the market and then compete with other people. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome everyone. As Professor Vachani said, it's nice to see a big audience on a Sunday morning. Obviously, the fact that you're here and the fact that what brings me here is that we are discussing a topic very close to my heart. I've been in Biocon now 24 years, and I started my career essentially working with my team, setting up almost all of the manufacturing plants that today Biocon has. So this is obviously a topic close to my heart. It's also a topic close to the nation's heart because of the thrust on manufacturing. People have talked about how we need to increase manufacturing from around 16% of GDP to 25+% of GDP, and make sure that manufacturing plays its role, I would say, as a partner to services, agriculture, and other sectors as a true contributor to GDP. It's also a pleasure to be at the IIM, walk through the so-called hallowed portals of IIM. And so I decided to, I'm not a management graduate, but I decided to structure my presentation to cater to what I thought would be appropriate for an audience tuned to a management kind of systems. So that's the reason I've got 3 slides, and I'll keep it sort of brief and to the point. How do I? Which one? This one. No? Yeah, that's good. No, that's fine. So a lot of people, when it comes to the Make in India or the increasing the manufacturing sector in India, there's been a lot of articles over the last several months on this topic. And what I've listed here are leveraging India's natural advantages, and these have been talked about. So I'll very quickly run through this and get to the meat of what I would like to talk about today. We all talk about demographics, but the challenge, as we all know, is how do we convert population numbers to skills and knowledge? It's not just enough to have a large number of young people graduating from colleges, but we talk about employability. When we talk about skills and knowledge, it's not just about how do we improve vocational training and vocational skills. It's also how do we equip people to work in a very dynamic environment. Manufacturing technologies also change very rapidly. And to keep abreast of the technological changes that we see globally, so that we are not left behind as a country, It's also important that the skills and knowledge base also keeps changing as dynamically as technology changes. So that's one of the key challenges to really get a dividend from the demographics that we keep talking about. India is also rich in natural sources, whether it's minerals or coal or what have you. But it's also important to have a focus on how we can leverage the commodities to value-added conversion. We've all seen how countries that are almost solely dependent on commodities, whether it's mining or oil, are very often susceptible to very drastic changes when commodity prices crash. And the countries that really talk about sustainable growth are the ones that have been able to not just have commodities, but use those commodities for value-added conversion or value-added manufacturing. We also, of course, talk about our democratic and legal systems, how our democratic and legal systems are globally aligned. The important thing we all know is that whilst we do have democratic and legal systems in tune with the Western world, in tune with the developed countries, how do we move from a sort of bureaucratic mindset to a mindset that focuses on good governance and speed of decision making and speed of transactions? India has a very strong entrepreneurial culture. It's about how we capture this entrepreneurial culture from a services or a trade or a retail mindset to focus on manufacturing and innovation. Because a lot of our entrepreneurial culture is today very much clued into services and trading. Finally, of course, from a corporate standards point of view, our corporate systems, even with the new Companies Act, accounting standards are all typically globally aligned. What the challenge is how do we leverage our global alignment on corporate governance standards, company laws, accounting standards to facilitate partnerships, investment, trade, and contracts. And this is an area where actually we have a leverage over many, many other emerging countries where their systems are not so advanced or aligned as the Indian corporate systems and accounting standards are. So what I've done is what I've said in the previous slide is well known. It's nothing new. But what I've decided to do is capture some of my thoughts in the form of sort of 4, you can say, pivots around which the thrust on manufacturing can take place. The first thing I would like to talk about is what is the objective? Why do we want Make in India? Why do we want manufacturing to be a greater, to contribute a bigger piece of the GDP pie? So what's the vision? What's the strategy? And that is really captured in the upper right corner here. So we need to make when we say we, it's the government, society, industry, all of us need to play a role in terms of deciding, is the objective of Make in India employment generation? Is the objective self-reliance? Or is the objective exports to meet, to address balance of payments or trade deficits or cross-currency forex rates? What is the objective? Or is it value addition to move from commodities into a value-added products? So once you set your vision around these objectives, I think you can have directed investments to meet many of these objectives. What are the enablers to meet these objectives? Of course, many of the levers of enablement lie with the government. Many of these lead to talent and skills. I talked about that. Infrastructure, everybody knows about infrastructure, logistics, transport, power, regulations. Here, I know we talk about ease of doing business, we talk about simplification of regulations, but I'd like to touch upon a slightly different aspect, especially coming from the biopharmaceutical industry. One of the key differences between some of the regulations that we've seen when regulators regulate us, even from countries to which we export, especially regulators from the US and European markets, is that their regulations are very much driven by science, reasoning, and logic. So very often, there's a cascade of regulations. Not all regulations are cast in stone by an act of parliament into a law. So they do have laws, but then they have rules, and then they have guidelines. And a lot of, for example, the good manufacturing practices that apply to pharmaceutical industry are issued as guidelines. Guidelines give industry and the regulator flexibility to interpret the law to achieve the same objective as what the intent of the law was. So, and it allows you to have a dialogue with the regulator if you have a different approach of achieving the same objective and not just a checkbox approach because the law says you have to do something, you have to do it. And we've seen that practically whenever the US FDA audits us. Over the last 12 years, we've been audited by the US FDA a number of times, and each time we've been very, very successful. Even this year, in 2014, Biocon and its subsidiaries were inspected by the US FDA 5 times, and we've come out successful. Largely because we were able to use logic, reasoning, and a science-based approach, which is part of quality by design, which sometimes people talk about. So that's what I would like to talk about on regulations. And lastly, of course, fiscal policies. The third element of Make in India or manufacturing is what are the differentiators? In management speak, you might say, what is our competitive advantage? Is our competitive advantage to be cost? Is it scale? Is it quality, reliability? I would say these three are today a given. If you don't have cost, scale, and quality and reliability, you're not even playing the game. So these are almost a given. So the key differentiator has to be technological innovation. And that is something which I mentioned when I said that the entrepreneurial culture needs to move from services and trading to manufacturing and innovation. Finally, I can't close without talking about values. When I talk about values, my predecessor talked about contract labor and employees. Self-esteem plays a very, very important role in this. Today, industries are challenged by attracting students into the manufacturing sector. Why is that? Because the self-esteem or the notion is that it is more flashy to be in the services industry than in a manufacturing industry. There are these notions of blue collar and white collar. These are all notions linked to self-esteem, and we need to find ways to break that. And the ways to break that is by explaining to people that manufacturing is not a drudgery job. It's all about leveraging technological innovation to make a product that can increase the brand image of the organization or the country. Trust. An element of trust is required between all stakeholders, between industry, society, labor, management, whatever you. So trust plays a very, very important role. And finally, of course, responsibility. Social responsibility is just one aspect of that. But responsibility to the patient as a pharmaceutical company, responsibility to society in terms of making your products affordable and accessible, all of that plays a very important role if you want to succeed as a manufacturer. My last slide is, since I come from the biopharmaceutical sector, I just thought I'd capture some statistics. The biopharmaceutical sector is one sector where India's manufacturing is already globally recognized. Today, we are the third biggest manufacturer in the world by volume, 10th by value. The only reason we score lower on by value than volume is because we are largely a generics player, whereas most of the European and US and Japanese companies are basically innovators. They have patented products. We have over 500 sites qualified by the US FDA and several by the European and other authorities as well, and many more by the WHO. So which means there are 500 sites which meet global standards today and export out to the US and Europe. We have over $15 billion of exports, as I said, or 60% to the US and Europe. 70% of the exports in the pharmaceutical sector are what we consider value-added formulations, not the bulk drugs and intermediates. And there, we are way ahead of China. We always tend to compare India and China. India already has an advantage over China when it comes to biopharmaceuticals and pharmaceuticals. Competitive costs, we are already 40% of the US. And the pharmaceutical sector is a knowledge-driven industry. Minute it becomes a knowledge-driven industry, it means it opens up jobs, higher-paying jobs, higher value-added jobs to people like pharmacists, chemical engineer, chemists, microbiologists, what have you. So these are not low-paying jobs. These are high-paying jobs. However, our industry is, of course, highly regulated by multiple government agencies. And this, of course, is something that we are actively engaged with the government of India on how to streamline many of this. We are rapidly eroding our cost advantages through high wage inflation. And the reason we have high wage inflation is because obviously there's a shortage of skilled manpower. So that comes back to get the dividend from demographics. It's not the numbers, it's the skills that matter. And finally, we are increasingly, because of the eroding cost advantages, we are increasingly as an industry getting dependent on imports for starting materials and key intermediates. Especially many of these imports then start coming in from China. So I'd like to leave it at that to keep it within the time, and if there's any questions, of course, we'll address it later. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And, it's a privilege for me to be present here, and I thank IM for inviting me to share my experiences on manufacturing in India. The Make in India campaign that's being launched by the current government, I think is very relevant to our operations. What I intend doing today is to run you through a little, story about how we started in India and what are the kind of benefits and the opportunity that we see in India. But before that, let me share with you, I represent United Technologies Aerospace Systems, part of the UTC group. A little brief about UTC. In India, we are operating on the commercial business and the aerospace business. On the commercial side, we have Otis, elevators and carrier air conditioning. On the aerospace side, we have the Sikorsky platform. In India, we have JV'd with the Tatas. Then we have the Pratt & Whitney engines. And finally, United Technologies Aerospace Systems. United Technologies Aerospace Systems is actually the formation of, actually it's a result of the acquisition of Goodrich Aerospace Systems by UTC. The legacy Hamilton Sundstrand business and Goodrich together today form United Technologies Aerospace Systems. Again, here we are a tier 1 supplier to the integrators in the aerospace business. The integrators are Boeing and Airbus on the large commercial aircraft and cargo aircraft. And then you have, Bombardier and Embraer and all the other smaller players. And of course, you have in the defense business too. When I say risk-sharing partners, is that we invest upfront with the integrators for new programs, new platforms. You need to have very deep pockets. You're talking about platforms that would be flying 8 and 10 years from now, those that are on the development stage. So UTAS is, again, split into 2 segments. One is the aircraft system segment. Again, mind you, we are not component level suppliers. We are system level suppliers. So on the aircraft system segment, we focus on mechanical assemblies. It's out there. And on the electronic side, again, it's the power control and sensing segment. We deal with sensors, which we deal with engine and control systems, and a whole range of products. So much so that the next slide will tell you where we are on an aircraft. This is UTAS portfolio on the aircraft. And believe me, within UTC, some of the platforms, new platforms, we could be in excess of 55 to 60% systems on an aircraft. Let me now take you through our story in India. The Make in India campaign, as I said, is close to my heart because, way back in 1997 is when we were part of the Goodrich business. We began a small major repair and overhaul center in India, trying to focus on repair of evacuation systems. At that time, India had just 80 2 commercial aircraft flying. So actually, if you looked at it from a business perspective, there was not much of a business. Things are changing rapidly. Today, India has 350 aircraft flying. And I think in the years to come, as Mr. Agastya said, there's going to be a huge demand. I think we're talking about India requiring about 1,500 aircraft in the next 15 years. Nevertheless, we started with an MRO, didn't realize that it was not a big opportunity. And sometime in 2000 is when we realized that we should push for, manufacturing in India, design in India. But unfortunately, we did not have the background. India did not have the background in the commercial aerospace manufacturing business. Of course, HAL has been there. The erstwhile HAL has been there on the defense manufacturing side. So it was a very difficult time trying to convince our counterparts in the US that we should begin manufacturing in India. Finally, the small group, we were just 10 or 12 people. We persevered. And again, we can have a lot of dreams, but you need to begin small. We began with a very small product. Again, we found something that was low risk, something that would not affect the image of the company. And again, we were trying this for the first time in India. And when you're at the beachhead, let me tell you, you start in small steps. So we began with the Aviation Life Raft program. I can keep talking for hours on this subject, but let me tell you, that was the beginning of our venture into manufacturing in India. We transitioned that product line in about 6 months' time, then pushed hard for doing some more, and then we began with slides manufacturing. And you can see the history out there. In 2006 is when we decided that we were getting pretty good at the manufacturing side. But in the aerospace business, this is a low volume, high mix business. You need to have a lot of value add in it. And India had the engineering talent. We wanted to leverage that talent. We were dealing with a lot of service providers. Unfortunately, again, the domain expertise was missing. We realized that if we had to develop engineering capability, then we should hire our own engineers, set up our own design center, build up competencies, and go up the value chain. So we began with just about 2 drafters and 1 tech pub writer in 2006. Today, we are about 1,200 engineers supporting product that's being made in India as well as worldwide. In fact, I have some of my colleagues from the design center, Ravi and Mani, out here. It's been a great, story. But, when you do not have the domain expertise, the only way to do it is to hire brilliant engineers, train them, and slowly start performing. What I want to mention here is that these things do not happen overnight. Again, especially when you do not have a market in India. The commercial aerospace market does not exist. Commercial manufacturing industry does not exist in India. What we do today is for 100% export back to Boeing and Airbus. Where we have seen, opportunity was if you start looking at manufacturing alone or design alone or the supply chain alone, then you're going to be looking at it in silos. You're going to be limiting yourself to a certain level. But when you combine the 3, and that's what we did, you definitely go up the value chain. And India has that opportunity. We have, the talent. In fact, on the supply chain, I'll talk about it later on, but we began developing vendors, and today we have been able to localize 30% of our spend here. And this is all pure aerospace, meeting international quality standards. On the operations side, today we focus on mechanical assemblies and electronic assemblies. The products that we focus on are aircraft evacuation slides, aircraft interior and exterior lighting, cargo systems, auxiliary flight control motors, and sensors assemblies. When you look at the growth, and then we talk about the supply chain, way back in 2001, 2002, we realized that if we did not develop the supply chain, in fact, the ecosystem did not exist. HAL was doing everything in-house, completely vertically integrated. You had to create a supply base. Importing those parts all the way from either US or Europe and assembling them here did not make sense. So we have, over a period of time, developed a number of vendors, but I still believe it's just the beginning. On the global engineering side, you can see a number of areas that we focus on. Today, let me share with you that we are the first company that are able to ship airworthy product from India. Last year, we got approval to ship airworthy product. In fact, the first airworthy product from India got shipped in the month of December. This has been a big milestone, not just for us, but for the country. And it only goes to show that when you have the perseverance and the passion to make something happen, it can happen in India. Mind you, again, not for this local market. Let me give you a little, and that's enough on the India story. Let me give you a little background about the aerospace and defense globally. You can see this industry growing at a pretty fast pace worldwide. I think 2015, the estimates are about 929 billion. In that, about 188 billion is on the civil side. When I say civil, it is commercial aircraft and cargo aircraft. There are a number of challenges, but also great enablers. The Asia-Pac region is growing. Technologies are changing. There are huge opportunities for manufacturing of aircraft. In fact, worldwide today, there are 11,000 aircraft flying. By 2040, there will be 38,000 aircraft flying. And you wonder, those kind of volumes, where are they going to be made? So this is a huge opportunity for us. There are pricing pressures worldwide. And it's just not the aerospace industry. I think it's all over. But in the aerospace industry, we see, margin pressures increasing, shareholders expecting more returns, pricing pressures on new platforms, wage escalations. Although the bases are high, though you might look at 3 or 4% wage increases worldwide, especially US and Europe, but the base is pretty high. And then we are talking about excessive, costs in general administration expenses. Personally, we have seen India playing a huge role in our operations within UTAS. What we have been able to do is to bring in product here, improve productivity, as my earlier panelists mentioned, improve productivity. I mean, many times people think about India and productivity. You see the general overall productivity numbers, which is not indicative of the productivity improvements that you see in the private industry. On an average, we have been able to improve productivity by about 25 to 30%. Quality is a given. In aerospace, quality is a given. You cannot afford to have anything lower than 0 ppm. Talent is another area. Global aerospace, the average age of an engineer is about 43 years. Again, we see with the talent that we have in India that provided the right education and the right training, we could play a big role worldwide. On the cost side, this is a comparison about the cost structure in terms of labor. You can see India, even way back, way into 2020, appears to be very, very positive. I'm not even comparing the high-cost countries where aerospace is mainly, present. But worldwide, you can see a big opportunity there. Coming to our, vendor base or the aerospace supply chain. On the left, you can see a structure there, a typical structure, very well defined. Global aerospace industry, you have the integrators at the highest level. Then you have the tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3 vendors. In India, for whatever reason, our integrators do everything. I mean, at the bottom, you can see them playing even a role on the component level. Now, there's a huge opportunity here, and I believe public sector and HAL have taken big steps, and I should congratulate them on that in trying to develop this base. Because without the base, without the tier 3s and tier 4 suppliers, the integrators cannot focus on technology. Also, from a cost perspective, it does not make sense. This is something that is a huge opportunity in India, and I believe, this is where the Make in India campaign is going to really be pushing in the aerospace and defense side. You look at the way the India manufacturing spread is, I'm talking about the public sector, and mainly they are into the defense and A&D sector in India. You have huge capabilities across this country that can be leveraged. Today, some of them are underutilized too. There's a huge order book. And I definitely believe that tier 2 and tier 3 players will be playing a major role, and that is where the private industry will come in. Opportunities exist. I mean, we have been hearing, and this is not just on the aerospace side, I'm talking about general now. You can see huge opportunities for India, not just from a local consumption perspective, but also from a global perspective. But you have competition, and we have to think global. We have competition from different countries. Countries are making certain industries their strategic focus for the next 20, 30 years. They are investing, they are bringing in long-term policies, and somewhere in India, it's time for us to sit and start taking note of these things. Because in a global scenario, I can tell you, we have tough times sometimes trying to convince our counterparts as to why it should be coming into India when the governments in the other countries are supporting it big time. They're heavily incentivizing and subsidizing these industries. Why in India? I won't talk about it. I think there's a lot of opportunity out here. Let me skip. This is one slide that I would like to talk about. And that is on the areas that we need to focus on. We need to create ecosystems. Today industry has evolved in India, but I think there has been no strategy, there's been no focus as to how you develop this industry. So here is where we need to focus on supplier development, the tier 3 and tier 4 component level guys. Clusters need to be focused on. Again, these could be very industry specific. You can't really commonalize them. Then industry and academia have to work very closely. And when I say that, it comes back to talent. We have a huge pool of talent, but are they industry ready? Are they focused on the practical aspects of industry? This is something that I think as a country we have to relook at the way we educate our engineers for the future. Skills development. Again, we have a number of training institutes and ITIs and whatever, but again, are they industry focused? Is industry also participating? I put the blame on industry too, because we expect ready-made talent from the institutions, but is industry getting involved in preparing the talent? On the regulatory side, I think there's a whole list out there that needs to be looked at. And finally, from an infrastructure side, today the Indian cities, all of us know the way we are talking about smart cities, but what I believe is we need to create knowledge cities, cities that focus on every aspect of an ecosystem. The other area that I think needs to be looked at is you need professionals to be, running these initiatives, industry-specific professionals with the right background to create these ecosystems. Many times it's left with the government bodies. We have many industry bodies, but those are basically people who get together, try to push the government to move in a particular direction. But everything looks good on paper, and in India, many times things look very good on paper. But translating that into reality is something that is missing in this country. And this is where I believe professionally run organizations tasked with creating ecosystems for specific industries is the need of the hour. Finally, you have a global need. I talked about it worldwide. You have a local need. So I see an opportunity here. And it's not just left with the state governments, it's not left with the central government. I think industry, government, the academic institutions all need to play a major role in creating this ecosystem. This is just a typical example of how would you create an ecosystem. It's just not, talk about talent or institutions, but also you need the social infrastructure to support these kind of developments. With that, let me tell you, at UTAS, we are very, very positive about our growth in India. We definitely are proud that, although it's been 15 years with a lot of struggle, we have been able to establish Make in India in the true sense, the aerospace industry globally. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank IMB for inviting me for this program. Secondly, it's a great feeling for me to be back here. In fact, we graduated out of this campus exactly 32 years ago. Probably it was the month of May, if I'm not mistaken. Since 5 Points someone was made popular in this campus by Chetan Bhagat, I thought somehow I relate. Since I'm older than him, I thought I will talk about 10 points some things regarding manufacturing. I think the problem with the last speaker is that many of the points which one has got in his mind would have been already spoken by the other speakers, so we still need to keep the interest alive. So I will try to do my level best to do that. I am a strong proponent of make for India rather than make in India. In fact, irrespective of what the government and the industry experts say, I think the population of this size with 1.25 billion, we cannot be first looking at the global market, rather look at the Indian market. It's disheartening to really see that low-end products like your Ganesha idols or Diwali diyas being imported into this country when you have enough skill and enough manpower to make this within the country. I think this is really, I think we should start from there, that what is it that is driving these people to import and sell rather than manufacture here? Given the number of people who are there without jobs, given the kind of demand that is being generated in the country, I think we should really look at that aspect more critically. In fact, when I was in China, I was attending World Economic Forum's China Business Summit way back in 2004. The focus of the Chinese government at that point of time was to see that how do they sustain a minimum 7% growth of Chinese economy. In fact, the leadership is so focused, I mean, that's something we need to learn. They said that if at all they have to sustain this kind of growth, they need to generate 695,000 jobs every week. I mean, the kind of in-depth understanding of what is required for an economy and focusing on that is something which we need to learn if at all we have to make this economy thrive and ensure that the so-called demographic dividend is really materialized instead of becoming a kind of a cause of concern for democratic instability, I should say. This Canton Fair, some of you may be aware, in China there is something called Canton Fair which is held in Guangzhou province twice a year. Nearly 30 to 35% of the Chinese export orders are booked in this Canton Fair. I used to visit to just get a feel of it. In fact, here, right from the toys to stationery to electronics to appliances to the high-end products, everything is showcased and that's exported. Now, I saw that 2003, 2004, few thousand Indians used to come to book orders. But I left China in 2008, and the last one which I attended, it was 20,000 Indians. So people from India find it easy to go book container loads of this kind of low-end products, bring it, sell it at probably 3 times the procurement cost, and then enjoy the money and then go back for the next Canton Fair. And this mindset change is the most important aspect, irrespective of what government policies are. Unless this mindset is changed, the shortcut approach to our prosperity, if it is not changed, I don't think Make in India will ever be a success. I think some of this I covered in terms of what to make. I think we should be very clear. In fact, my earlier colleagues who spoke earlier, they mentioned very clearly that we cannot be trying to make everything here. First, focus on what is it that we can make, which is relevant for India, and what is it which we can make for the global economy. We always talk about, I think, a 25 to 65 age group population is going to be the most dominant in India, and that is going to be the biggest share in the global, compared to the rest of the world. The aging population is going to have its toll in the rest of the world, whereas in India it is going to be a plus point. But at the same time, what is the kind of demands that these people are required to, these guys are going to generate that we need to cater to? Do we allow this to be simply imported, or do we make it here so that we also create employment at the same time meeting the demand and address our Raghuram Rajan's problem of forex deficits also? In fact, another colleague of a friend of mine from the same batch of ours, he wrote recently, he said that you should learn to do synchronized swimming with your customers, because unless you change your mindset, unless you change your approach towards business based on the changing expectations of the consuming class, which is hardly about 75 to 80 million today, which is likely to be 200 million plus in the span of another 10 years, then you will be just investing in the wrong things. So understanding the changing needs and aligning oneself towards that is the next important challenge if you really want to make in India a success. And in terms, I think this is again, we need to understand that what is it like. I told you initially that a whole lot of things that are unnecessarily being imported, which can easily be manufactured in the country, and that's what is going to create employment for hundreds of millions of youth who are there in the working population category, who may be unskilled or semi-skilled. You cannot think of employing them in Chris Rao's business, because definitely that industry is an icing on the cake, but it is not going to solve the problem of the country. We need to look at the lower strata of society and see how do we give them the jobs. I think that's the biggest challenge. And the second one, of course, is whether it is Biocon or whether it's the aerospace industry. Definitely we have enough number of talent to see that we can cater to the global requirements, try to make India a hub for catering to global needs. There is no dearth of talent, and once you are able to set up the base here, I think the people will come and pour in money from all over the world. And the third one is, I think, another key area of focus, because we have, I don't know, millions of graduates coming out of the institutes year after year, but many of them are only aspiring to go out after their masters. I don't know, even in this classroom, if you ask, more than 50% would rather like to go out after finishing their studies rather than stay here. So this mindset, if at all you have to change, you should create opportunities for them in terms of the industries where they can be used, meaningfully deployed, and made their life that much more comfortable compared to the rest of the world, so that they don't have to think of migrating out. I was having an interaction with Dr. Rakesh Mohan, who was the Deputy Governor of RBI. Prior to that, he was the advisor to Industry Ministry. That was in the 90s. So that time I worked with him in preparing a perspective report for the petrochemical industry. And that was the first sectoral study undertaken by Manmohan Singh or Narasimha Rao government when Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, to understand what is our competitiveness of the industry and what is it that we can make, what is it that we can't make. So we should look at the domestic resource cost of making a product. Is it really worth making it here? Suppose if you have to pay through your nose and then you have to make it, it's really not worth making it. Either you resort to disruptive thinking to bring down the cost, or let it come from outside. You focus on what is it that your strength. That's another area we need to focus when we're talking about expanding the manufacturing base in the country. As far as China is concerned, in fact, we should not be comparing with China as far as manufacturing is concerned, because the models are different. We are not comparing apple with apple. Food inflation in China, in fact, this is again related to consumption, because China set up all their manufacturing only for the purpose of exports. They are either investment driven or export driven, not so much consumption driven. And today they are in a mess because the global demand is totally shrunk, and they don't know what to do with their kind of huge capacities that they have set up. Even in my own business, PVC, which I am doing, the global demand for this product is global demand is about 40 million tons, but the capacity is 58 million tons. And out of 58 million tons, 28 million tons is only in China. And the country's demand is only 15 million tons, and they're operating at 50%. Now, this kind of a model cannot work in India, because there the government is sitting with 3 trillion plus kind of forex reserves. They can afford to throw money, but we don't have that luxury. So we should be seeing where do we invest and how do we ensure that the markets are there to cater to the local demand, rather than looking at hoping that we will be able to export over a period of time and ensure that the employment is guaranteed for the people who are deployed in the industry. And managing food inflation is the only way you can ensure that there's enough disposable income with the people. And as you know that several economic theories are there that $2 per capita is considered to be the kind of a break-even level. Only when the country's per capita income goes beyond $2, there will be disposable income, because $2 is bare minimum. Of course, people talk about 32 rupees, good enough, but let's be realistic. Maybe at 100, 120 rupees is the bare minimum required for a person to survive in this country. We crossed this $2 per capita. That's about $700 billion of GDP in 2004. Between 2004 and 14, we have gone from 700 billion to 1.8 trillion. But unfortunately, during this period, a whole chunk of people moved into consuming class. But have we created any manufacturing facility in the country to cater to this increasing demand? The disposable income has gone up, and once the fulcrum shift from $2 and above, more and more people will be requiring products, and you need to manufacture more. That will again create more employment opportunities, and hence more income for the people in the lower strata of society. So if you are not able to address this, if you are not able to cater to this, then you are going to end up only importing product and running into huge forex deficits without creating employment. I think that's the biggest challenge, the core of what I wanted to convey in this. And the mindset change, of course. This is, in fact, others have also spoken. I also mentioned about the Canton Fair example. Other one is this Plex Council. There is an agency called Plastic Export Promotion Council. This council basically is a body which promotes export of the finished products. After I came back from China, I spent some time with them and tried to give my China experience. I told them that, look, a simple product like, in the aircraft you get a pouch consisting of a spoon, a fork, a knife in a plastic cover. It is a standard package you get across the globe in any aircraft. A company like Lufthansa, if they want to place order, they place order for millions and millions of pieces. In China, you have got a government body. Each province has got an export-import company. That company is the one which gets these orders, and then they go to various clusters. There is a cluster manufacturing concept. They go to individual clusters. One person will be only making millions of spoons. One cluster will be making only knives. One will be making only fork, and one will be making only pouches, and one cluster will only be packing it. So he collects it from them and then delivers. When it comes to India, not a single manufacturer, it's of course in a medium and small scale industry, is capable of catering that kind of demand. So if Lufthansa wants to place an order, they will not go to 25 different guys and place 100,000 tons order. They would like somebody to deliver. We don't have. I asked, why is it that you people can't do it? They say that, no, we have the entrepreneurial mindset. We do not want to collaborate with our competitors. So so while we talk about we should become the next manufacturing hub of the world, these mindset, if they don't change, how is it possible for us to really move in that direction? That's a big challenge, according to me. And another anecdote, Mr. Suresh Krishna, I think, Sundaram Fasteners, he came to inaugurate his plant near Shanghai when I was there. And the kind of reception he got from the provincial government, the kind of encouragement he got, after that he came back to India. And then the people asked him, some interviewer asked him, what is his opinion about investing in China? He said that the next investment, if I want to make, I'll rather go and do it in China, not in India. This is the kind of entrepreneurial attitude they have towards the kind of lacuna that exists here compared to what is there for attracting investment in China. So again, it's a question of mindset we need to change. That's a long way to go if we really want to make in India a success. I think some of these points are already covered. We should not compare with China. We should rather look at what is it that we can make for India rather than make for the rest of the world. We lost that game 10 years ago when we were really in a good. In fact, I had arguments with some of my friends who were sitting here way back then that unless we invest in infrastructure, manufacturing can never take off. But we went gaga over the service industry, and that ended us where we are today. So unless we change now, I think we're going to miss the bus forever. I think, again, sustainability, it is not just the word. I think there is a lot of action required both from the industry as well as from the government to see that our visions are fulfilled. FTAs, again, in fact, our own business, we have seen that so much of FTAs have happened mindlessly. People do it without even bothering about what is it that we need to encourage in terms of import, what is it that we need to export. We don't have any leverage in terms of exporting what strengths we have, but we blindly allow imports. I'm not against free trade. See, you have got the lowest tariff, import tariffs in most of the products, which is 6.5% if I'm not mistaken. But in the FTA regime, over a period of time, it has come to zero. And you end up, again, getting a whole lot of simple products which can be made in India. How will you encourage domestic manufacturing if you do that? So that's something which the government has to seriously relook at. And after these 10 points, few small things about what government can do, which others also have spoken in terms of infrastructure. And in fact, somebody was talking about IP. Yesterday, I met one of my customer. He has developed applied for the IP rights for some of the products that he's making. He says 2010 he applied. He applied in India, he applied in US, he applied in Europe. He got it from there, he has not got it from India. They say that the backlog is so much that you'll have to wait for some more time. The guy has got a product, he cannot produce it because the IP rights have not been given. So this is something. And second one is, of course, land. People want to expand their businesses, but they find it so difficult to get the land. And we have enough of unproductive land. If only you can develop those unproductive land, improve the connectivity, and make it a manufacturing hub, I think which my other panel members also mentioned, that can go a long way in making in India a success story. I think that's all I wanted to convey. Probably I overshot by 5-10 minutes. Sorry about it. But again, it was a great pleasure talking to you.